morning, everyone. A big warm welcome to yet another Nordic Talk. Today, the theme will be biodiversity. And what better to have a talk about biodiversity with a view of a lot of buildings and no trees. But they're beautiful still. But we know that we are in a biodiversity crisis. We are facing the 6th extinction of all species, and we know that 1 million species are at risk of disappearing within the nearest future. We also know that this is a big risk to our future generations, but it's also a risk to society, and it's a risk to business. 50% of global GDP is directly dependent on nature. So we really need to have some healthy ecosystems that help us purify water, clean the air, and make sure that we have something to eat. I would like to invite Louisa to the stage with me here, because we're in a Nordic discussion, and we did a global SDG stocktake together with Accenture, and we also did a Nordic stocktake together with Accenture. So who better to give the floor than Louisa, who has been helping us with that, to give some perspectives about nature and biodiversity in the Nordics.
Thank you, Sarah, and delighted to be here this morning with all of you. So just like Sarah mentioned, we launched the first ever Nordic SDG stocktake earlier this week on Monday. And it's been a collaboration between Accenture Nordics and the UN Global Compact networks across the Nordic countries. And I think, we're halfway through to delivering on the SDGs. It's been a mantra for this week, mentioned in many different forums. But the trigger for us to really go out and carry out this study has been the fact that we are lagging behind. We see that 82% of the SDG indicators have either stalled or gone reverse. So we have been consulting industry groups, small, medium, large companies, in order to understand what do we need to do and how can we capitalize on the unique opportunities of relevance in the Nordic ecosystem. And whilst we see that we are leaders within many of the socially linked SDGs, we also see tremendous gaps when it comes to the environmentally focused SDGs, not the least sustainable production and consumption, climate action, life below water, and life on land. And when we went out exploring this with data, we also realized that only 40% of Nordic businesses today disclose information around nature-related risks and impact. And when you look at the global average, this is actually much lower. So globally, we are doing better when it comes to nature disclosures, which is quite an interesting finding. And I think there's a lot of action and information that we need to have an honest and transparent conversation about with regards to that. And this is happening, you mentioned the dependency around nature with regards to the GDP. It's happening at a time when 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries have already been crossed. But I think this week we have also seen a lot of great momentum. The TNFD, Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, have finally launched a piece of guidance which builds upon 2 years of very heavy work. And we have also seen a lot of good nature innovation projects that have been launched, not the least the nature rights towards ocean and rivers, but also new type of innovative finance products when it comes to coral reef insurance, amongst others. So that gives hope, and so does our EU rules, which are entering into force 2024, and I have big expectations for that's going to be a new nature paradigm. So really looking forward to start this conversation with all of you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you. And I think it's very important that you mentioned the TNFD and also the science-based targets for nature, because from a Danish perspective, we've been collaborating with Finance Denmark, and we reached out to all the finance organizations in the Nordics to make Nordic consultations also with our sister networks in Sweden, Norway, and Finland, to really collaborate on also getting Nordic consultations on the essence and the content of the TNFD. So that business can also be more active in defining what can we measure, what data can we gather, and how do we do that. So I think this conversation is also very important, because we really need to talk about the same things and measure the same things all around the globe, especially if we also want this included in the global supply chains. So in order to get this really going, we need to work together, and we know that, and we need governments. So I would like to invite Marina von Weissenberg, who is Senior Ministerial Advisor and Chief Negotiator for Biodiversity in Finland. So thank you for joining. I think collaboration with government is very, very important. So please come up and take a mic. And I would also like to invite Melina Sakiyama, who's co-founder of the Global Youth and Biodiversity Network. And you're based in Brazil. Yes, welcome to the stage. And that's the youth voice and the activist voice for really taking care of our nature. And last but not least, Virginia Dundas from Danish company Ørsted. And Virginia is head of climate and nature sustainability. So this collaboration is really important because none of us can reach any goals by ourselves. We need strong collaboration and also setting the bar. So I would like to ask you first, Marina, how are the Nordic countries planning to integrate the goals of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework into your existing climate action policies?
Hello and good morning, everybody. First of all, I think this is a day of celebration, 20th of September, because the BBNJ, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, is going to, the signatures starts today here in New York, and I'm very happy to announce that also Finland will sign that treaty, which is one of the main outcomes of the biodiversity. And I think that's one good example also of collaboration. I think 10 years it took to negotiate this deal. And that said, of course, the Kunming-Montreal agreement that we made in December is key. And of course, this was the first time in my history of being in the ministry, around 30 years or more, that the private sector was pushing the governments for solution. And it was very interesting to see the dynamic in the room. And that was the request then, and the target 14, 15, and 16, where 15 is about the disclosure requirement for business to be included. So how do we do now? I think the urgency is there. We have to do even better and faster because we need to start to implement what we have now agreed on. I mean, it's a fantastic 196 countries made the decision, but now it's time for, of course, implementation. And that's why I want to thank the Global Compact as well, because I think what we need is now to have targeted guidance, and you referred to, or it was referred to all the guidance that was made for the private sector here as well. And I also know that, for instance, there will be in nature now, or something alike, they are now working the science on having something alike like the 1.52 degrees for the climate change, where they are looking at the value change on using biodiversity. And I think this is really interesting to see on the impacts and what that will be. We have even Finnish researchers included in that. But then on the implementation, the climate change and biodiversity is the same integrated challenge or crisis we are set with. So we have to do this even more together. And today, of course, the Climate Summit is here in New York. But on the other hand, what we are doing on the government side is now the requirement to revise or adapt our national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And there are the so-called accelerator initiative where we really need to look at the climate change impacts on biodiversity and the biodiversity resilience for climate change on the adaptation and mitigation. And this has been two separated issues also in the governments. It's a strong climate, should we say, pact in the ministries, and then the biodiversity has been marginalized. But I think now is the time where this will be looked in together. And I think this is also the business case. I think why the private sector was pushing us so hard for the government side is that they have realized that if we are overconsumption our natural resources and they are not protected for the future, there will be no business case anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this is very important to see the collaboration and also setting the goals. But what we also see is that the understanding of the crisis is changing all the time. We constantly get new angles and new perspectives on the crisis that we tend to so we get a deeper understanding of how we affect it, and that there might be areas where we are not taking action, so we have to shift action all the time and focus on what we didn't know 2 or 3 years ago. So I think the collaboration is so important, and I'm looking at you, Melina. How are you mobilizing youth, and how are you engaging with governments and business to get this rolling and to get some tangible, real action on the ground to save the nature?
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much for the invitation. I think, thank you, the Global Compact, and also the Nordic leadership. I think, especially in the case of biodiversity, has been showing a lot of advancement and progress. Like Marina, I've known Marina for a long time. We have been working with the Nordic governments. We have a Nordic chapter of our network, and it's really important that this conversation is happening here at the margins of the Climate Week, like the SDG Summit and so on, because as Marina said, it's really essential that politicians, businesses understand that we are dealing with one crisis. It's multifaceted, as you mentioned, but it all is the same, and it's rooted in our relationship with nature, how we are completely separated from it, and we only see it as a commodity and as a means for growth and infinite growth, unfortunately, in a very finite planet. So I come from a global network. So it's over 1.2 million young people around, over 700 member organizations. We have members from 172 countries and over 60 chapters, national chapters around the world. And we have been the international coordination platform for the Convention on Biological Diversity, and have been working in collaboration, in a truly intergenerational collaboration with governments, like civil society, NGOs, and businesses and so on. And when we did a global consultation prior to the Biodiversity Summit and the discussions in Kunming, the priorities that young people demanded would be that we live sustainably, respecting the integrity of our ecological, socio-ecological system, and that there's not gonna be nature without rights and without inclusion. And I think this is a very crucial point for young people, because perhaps young people still are not biased because of their walk of life or their backgrounds. So they can understand that even though businesses practices, the economy functions differently in different parts of the world, if we all respect a set of principles, it is possible to achieve sustainability, and it's possible to actually truly understand the importance of nature and the risks that it represents to businesses and to all lives if it's not being taken care of. And I think what we meant with that is that I think we can all change the way we do our work, our businesses, our research, our policies, if we are more inclusive, if we take intergenerational partnerships and approaches, if we base everything with a strong human rights based approach. And I think that is what is gonna take us to the next level. So for young people, we have been very, very happy with the outcomes of the Kunming Montreal framework, but there is still a lot that needs to be improved. I think Marina mentioned that there is a huge effort of the business community to engage with the process, to disclose their finances and how they're impacting nature, but also using nature. But I think that should be more collaboration and more sort of like advancement in regulation, also in creating standards and a level playing field for businesses so that they can truly change and transition towards sustainability. And I think for that to happen, we will need to have a lot of collaboration among different like members of civil society. I think a lot more like dialogues between like young people and businesses would be important, because we are talking about a generation that will not tolerate bad businesses practice in the very near future. And if we are not able to change, and I mean, like coming from the global south, from Brazil, like we all know that our corporations now, they are global, right? So even in their home countries, if they are doing their best, but that best is not being done above, overseas, like this will have impacts. And that's unfortunately, or fortunately, where the majority of biodiversity is. So I think there's a strong calling from young people that businesses need to improve the practices, need to come together and in more dialogue with civil society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melina, and giving us this perspective of how you really can mobilize so many organizations around the world for this common goal. Now it's time to also understand what we need to do. And I think who better to ask than a business that's working with some concrete challenges. I know Ørsted is really leading the way and also partnering up with the WWF on providing solutions, and really also pushing government. So Virginia, how can business be an asset to policymakers in terms of offering the solutions that we need? And also, how can you make policymakers, how can policymakers incentivize business to take impactful nature action? So how can the policymakers also make sure, I'll give you mine, okay, that's fine, to make sure that we get there, very important. So where is yours?
Thank you, Sarah. And it's on. Hello? Take this. There we go. Hello? Yes. Hi, everyone. Morning, and it's very nice being here today. Thank you, Sarah, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone. What can businesses do to enable this? And I think maybe I'll give a quick, short introduction to Ørsted and what we're doing. So Ørsted is one of the largest renewable energy companies in the world. We are the absolute leader in offshore wind, responsible for 1/3 of the total capacity installed out there, but we have a growing portfolio across onshore solar, power to X, and so on. And sustainability for us, it's quite anchored in our transformation from having been one of the most coal-intensive energy utilities in Europe to being now a company fully dedicated to renewables. We have already reduced our Scope 1 and 2 emissions by almost 90%, and we will be essentially emissions-free in our Scope 1 and 2 in 2 years' time by 2025. We're also looking at a whole value chain where we'll be decarbonizing an entire value chain by 2040. And continuing our transformation to a sustainable business model, we have adopted a commitment to only commission projects that have positive biodiversity impacts from 2030 at the latest. And why are we doing that? And why are we doing this? Because of actually recognizing and acknowledging that the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis are one and the same, as my fellow panelists have said here, that as a global renewable energy company, we have the solution to actually, through clean energy, we can help solve both crises. And why is this? Because climate change is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss. So if we build more clean energy, which is the single most important action that we can take to combat climate change, then we're also helping nature. And it is about that is what we need the most from business. We need businesses to understand a bit more how the climate and the nature crisis is impacting their business. And a lot has been done and a lot is being taken care of here, but we need more companies daring to take a bold decision, daring to take a leading action across different industries. We've seen that when many companies like us, and I have also fellow companies from the industry that are also on the same journey as us, when we're moving towards that, we're also incentivizing policymakers to saying, yes, we're daring to take the steps, so please go ahead and also focus on the enabling policy frameworks that we need for this. When we hear stakeholders, youth, and many others also saying the same things, as a business, we cannot just be blind to what is happening outside. So what do we need from businesses? We need more engagement. We need more acknowledgement. But we also need to engage, and now there are some people representing certain groups here, we also need to engage the finance sector. It's really important. They also are a key enabler of what we're doing, and like we have been seeing the financial sector also moving into allocating funds towards climate actions from companies. We need to see them move towards allocating funds in terms of nature and biodiversity. This year, back in June, we were the first in the industry to launch a blue bond. We did so exactly to engage the finance sector on the challenges that we have, because biodiversity is also a risk to their portfolios. And it's also could also be an opportunity for them if they invest in the right business, in the right type of activities. Of course, there's still some work to do on that area, but we did it with that regard. And I think it's really important that as a business we engage across different sectors. That's one of the things that I would say. Then you asked me about policymakers and what can they do more of. And I think it's policymakers it's all about the enabling environment. It's all about enabling policies. So what we would like to see is more policymakers, at least in our sector, to be looking at how they integrate biodiversity as one of the criteria they are evaluating projects on green energy about. Whether it's a minimum criteria, whether it's an evaluating criteria, we need policymakers to start looking at the value creation of green energy projects beyond the actual green electrons. And to do that, the simple, easiest way to do it is to look at that when they evaluate the projects. It's not about price, they have to be cost competitive. We need to make green energy affordable for everyone, but we need to think about the long-term value creation that those projects have for the communities where we are, for the societies where we are. And that is sort of really, really important. When we engage locally in different communities and also in the Nordics, we hear a lot more from different stakeholders, NGOs, organizations alike, that they would like to see what more benefits are these projects bringing in terms of jobs, communities, nature, and so on. And we need policymakers to move along that way. I'll pause for now.
Thank you so much for your very, very important insights. The time is running, so after this discussion, we'll all be in the room, and I hope that we can share some experiences. I also have to acknowledge we have 4 women with brown and long hair. We are really working on diversity, and of course we have everyone in the room. But thank you so much for your perspectives. Let's continue the discussions and the dialogue. We need each other, and we need to push this agenda everywhere we go. So I'd like to invite Anastasia to take over from me and invite for the next panel, and give a big applause to Melina, Virginia, and Marina. And Anastasia, she's been leading the global SDG stocktake Accenture study together with Global Compact also, and you know a lot about what's going on at the global level. So I'll give the floor to you and to call the next panel.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So I'm really pleased to be here, delighted really, and I want to thank the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce for hosting us. I want to thank all of you for coming together, of course, the Global Compact. I think it's appropriate that I'm here, at least. As an American, I did some of my studies in Copenhagen, and I had a chance to visit Sweden and Norway and Finland, and so I feel like I'm amongst friends. And we're all here united around this topic of nature and biodiversity. So maybe a few opening words, and then I'll ask the panelists to please join. You know, I've spent 20-odd years now working with a range of businesses seek to become more inclusive of communities, of nature, across the spectrum of ESG topics. And nature and biodiversity is rising in the agenda, particularly biodiversity, right? This in many ways is a frontier. It's a newer topic for many organizations. And I know our panelists will bring a range of experience. Some are very deep and have been a leader for some time. Others are getting started. But I think collectively as a business community, I mean, as Marina mentioned, right? The tone is changing, right? You know, COP15 has really accelerated now, a lot more cohesion and consensus around what's needed. You know, and I just want to pause and reflect why we're all here, why we're talking about this, right? I think more data every day, every week comes in around the 6th mass extinction. I mean, it's heartbreaking. In my lifetime, 40% of birds have vanished from North America. Like, that is incredibly scary. You know, 90% of large fish, you know, tuna, swordfish, those stocks, you know, 90% are gone already today, right? And I think, you know, I have 2 little girls, and it's really propelled my career more into climate and these kinds of issues because of them, right? 8 and 4, and I read their books, and all the characters, right? Pandas and rhinos and lions and cheetahs, and in a few generations, they're only going to be in books. So the time for action is now, right? The business community has such a responsibility, a role here. It's you know, not only is it so important to our culture, our identity, our imagination to have a rich, thriving natural landscape, it's paramount for the operations of business. 144 trillion of GDP, half roughly of GDP globally, is dependent on nature and its services. And I think that might be conservative, right? But at least that. You know, it's just a paramount issue. So with that, I'd like to invite our panelists up here to the stage. I am not going to be very strong with all the pronunciations, so please forgive me. We have Satu Kupamäki from the S Group, a Finnish cooperative retailer serving consumers. Please join me. We have Helle Hark Hansen, Vice President for Environment at Vattenfall, a diversified energy company. We have Borge Romsla from Yara, everyone, you know, the agri-inputs company working globally. And then we have Dorad Nielsen from the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk in Denmark. Welcome. So I think, you know, I mentioned that we're all on a journey, right? And we're starting in different places and from different industry lenses. So we have a really rich conversation, I think, here to have. Dorad, maybe I'll start with you, right? I've had a pleasure to work with different life sciences companies, and you know, many have made incredible strides around access to medicines and you know, meaningful social impact. But for the most part, I would say they're not getting started on climate environment as quickly, perhaps, as other sectors. But Novo Nordisk, of course, you know, is being a leader, per usual, and has committed to 0 environmental impact. Now, you know, when we think about nature and these frameworks, like, tell us what that means, right? And how you've built a plan to achieve that, what some of the impacts are, the dependencies, please.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to talk about a topic that is very important. Yeah, Novo Nordisk, we are a large pharmaceutical company producing more or less half of the world's insulin, among others. So definitely we are a global company with, you can say, production facilities worldwide, but also we depend very much on the use of resources. So we started our journey in the environmental space many years ago with our first kind of climate target back in 2004, even before a lot of people start to acknowledge that climate was an issue. And then we have worked from that, and I think we have a good idea of how we want to limit scope 1, 2, and 3, and good plans for that. Obviously, 95% of our scope 3 emissions, or of our CO2 emissions, comes from our scope 3. So that being said, I think we are faring well on that. And then comes biodiversity, and to be honest, I think it's really difficult. I mean, climate, you know, it's CO2. Biodiversity is everything. It's frogs, it's birds, it's water, it's you name it. So of course that puts every company on a lot of pressure to understand the impact and also how do we act on it. So we started, you say we have our zero environmental impact, that's the aspiration. Will we ever get there? I don't know, maybe not in my lifetime, but I like, the idea of having a stretch target. So we simply started by mapping our impact and dependencies. So we hired in a consultant. It was not your company, I think, but somebody else. Just to help us, because I don't have anybody in my organization that knows a lot about biodiversity. So they made, a huge report, very difficult to understand and read. We spent a lot of hours digesting and at least try to come up with 3 things that we will start on. Why 3? Because 3 is a nice number, right? And first of all, it's land use and climate. Land use, because we are dependent on natural resources when we produce insulin. We use a lot of glucose in our production process. So that was kind of a natural step for us. Climate for obvious reasons. And then water was the next one. So really figuring out the use of water. We also do that in production. Globally, we are in areas with the water stress. So figuring out how we will do that. And the last one being biodiversity at local sites. So that is where we start. We have a huge support from executive management. So we started to hire in people. I mean, I think that's the first issue, right? Where do you find people that knows about this and that knows what we have to do? But we started that journey. We will hopefully have good colleagues on board. And then, we look very much forward to continue. So not a lot of specific projects we have done until now, but maybe next year I can tell a little more about some of the things that we have been doing.
Thanks, Dorrit, and for being so open and transparent with where you are on the journey, right? It is complex. It is a new space. We're shaping it together in some ways now. And what you said about the overly complex consulting report, I'm sure it was another consulting firm. We do need new tools that build skills, that build capacity, that allow companies to take action and go on that journey. And so I'd actually like, Satu, you to share a bit about some of the tools you're developing in collaboration with a number of others.
Yeah, thank you. So as a retailer, we are also dependent on the nature. All the raw materials nature gives us and the food we eat, at least it's natural. And of course we have and of course we have done a lot in climate sector. We have ambitious science-based client targets already, and we wanted to be able to calculate or assess the impact that we are having on nature. And we started a project in Finland with the University of Jyväskylä, and then we have Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra together with us. And we are building a tool for freely to use for all organizations, how to assess your biodiversity footprint by using bookkeeping financial data. And we are assuming that the results from the assessment will replace CO2 equivalent in future. The metric is BDF, potentially disappeared fraction of species. And you don't understand it now. The first figure came out from the initial assessment of our company was like 0.000017, and that doesn't tell you anything now. But who did understand CO2 equivalent 10 years ago? And now we are all very familiar to compare it, whether you choose what to eat or how the company actions.
Thank you for your contribution. You raised an important theme, and Marina and others mentioned it earlier. It's about this idea of integration, right? Bringing biodiversity into climate and even into our financial, using financial data. And when I think about the agriculture sector, right, and looking at the historical impacts, of course, of agriculture on land use and emissions, but also now, the opportunity on the ground, both from a climate and biodiversity perspective. Borga, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I know you're relatively new to Yara, but to hear a bit more about Yara's journey. You've been a leader in collaboration, right? You are looking at pesticides, clean ammonia. You are making innovations. What are you seeing?
Yeah, thank you so much for letting Yara be present here today, and also thank you for all the interesting interventions so far. It's very interesting. I had to bring speaking notes, as you say, because I've only worked for Yara for 3 weeks, so so I'm not sure if I'm in a position to, answer all your questions, but I'll try. As you know, Yara is a leading global company being present in all continents of the world, actually. 7,000 employees, 60 countries, and so on. And of course, as you said in the beginning, agriculture is, part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So we are very engaged in this biodiversity framework. We were one of the companies really appreciating the adoption at COP15. We took part in the preparations of the coming Montreal agreement through this 330 business to make it mandatory for all large businesses and financial institutions to assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity by 2030. So we believe, this adoption is a new milestone for proactive business involvement in nature preservation. And we see many challenges. You mentioned the SDGs. We are lagging behind on some of the goals that were quite advanced, actually, just a few years ago. So hunger, soil degradation, climate change, supply chain disruptions, they all demand immediate action from us. And agriculture, as I said, is contributing to at least 19 up to 29% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, according to the World Bank. And how do we respond to all this as a company? So we of course, are now looking into the framework agreement and so on, but we have just recently developed a new ambition, what we call growing a nature-positive food future. And this ambition is in a way divided into 3 pillars. So one is in a way on climate neutrality. So it will continue most of the work that we do on decarbonization. Yara has reduced actually its carbon emissions by 40% since 25. So a lot of the work on continuing that is under this pillar. You mentioned clean ammonia. That is among the most interesting paths we are exploring now. How can clean ammonia replace fossil fuels within shipping and so on? So this is a huge potential market that we are looking into now. The second pillar is what we call regenerative farming, a scientific-based concept, which is about improving farming productivity, nutrient use efficiency, and positively impact nature in the whole value chain. We are looking into soil health, which is becoming a major issue, and actually we're planning to take a big initiative, a global public partnership to make soil data available for common good. So that means that farmers, authorities, companies, research institutions actually can have access to these data and plan for better use of the soils. Then the last pillar of this ambition is what we call prosperity. It is about improving the farmer income and sustainability. Farmers are actually our best allies when it comes to preserving soil and land. But of course, they need to, at the end of the day, improve their income and sustainability and get the right incentives to positively impact their actions. Relatively speaking, we are using less money on food now if you compare back in time to the 60s and 70s. So farmers need to get their share of and be rewarded for sustainable practices. Of course, there are a few dilemmas when it comes to the biodiversity and how we do this. How can we conserve 30% of land, sea and inland waters, and 30% restoration of degraded ecosystems, while at the same time making sure that we can produce sufficient food to grow populations? And also investing in renewable energy and so on. There are a few dilemmas here, but at least Yara and my company is obviously ready to engage on this path together with all of these sectors that are present here today. Thank you.
No, thank you. And what I so appreciate about the approach Yara takes is really thinking about the various stakeholders to engage with and the unique contributions, right? Whether it's, thinking about framework agreements and engaging in that process, thinking about, the farmer livelihoods and their stake in the system, engaging with the scientific community. We need these very inclusive approaches if we are going to transform, right, the agriculture and food system. Helle, we mentioned renewable, right? It's clearly the goal one to have a sustainable future, the transition to renewable. Your company has been on that transition for quite a long time, has been a leader in many fossil fuel-free innovations, but also a deep commitment to biodiversity, kind of from the start, embedded in your DNA. So as having more experience than many of us here in this room, please share with us some of the lessons you've learned.
I would be happy to. Thank you very much. Well, Vattenfall is a Swedish state-owned energy company. It's one of Europe's largest producer and retailer of electricity and heat. And we have a very diversified portfolio, started 100 years ago, industrializing Sweden with hydropower. So a long history of renewable energy as well. And we heard a little bit about the implications from Virginia also. We have some of the same challenges. But it has been very clear that our line of business are very dependent on nature, and we do impact nature. And therefore, it has been, as you said, in our DNA to work with these topics for a very long time. Of course, now we also see that awareness is increasing, and we need to be more transparent on what we're actually doing. So we've also set a net positive approach ambition. And also with the backcasting approach, this is where we want to be 2030. And how we will get there, we will have to figure it out. But we work in 3 areas. And one area is connected to assess. So how can we assess how we impact, where the main risks are? How can we show and be transparent around progress? And we have, for that, used the Global Biodiversity Scoring Model, which is the first steps of the Science-Based Target for Nature, because we believe that we need these common frameworks in order to make sure that we're talking the same language, and it's very clear the targets we're setting is founded on the same approach. It's not easy, but I think we step by step need to get on board and learn. In addition, on the assess part, we've also developed together with Swedish industry and authorities a model for how to assess biodiversity on specific sites. And that kind of collaboration in understanding or having an acceptance of models is super important. The second area we work with is the ACT area, so actually doing biodiversity enhancing projects at site at any time. So it could be peatland restorations, creating meadows, reintroducing species in certain areas. We have mapped 1,800 kilometers of power line corridors with the aim to identify hotspots, and through management plans,
we have actually developed Natura 2000 areas within the power line corridors. And I mean, we have salamander and frog hotels, and they have checked in as well. So, I mean, we have all kinds of big and small initiatives. And the last pillar we work on is innovate. And I think that is one super, super important area. We have large research and development programs connected to our hydropower and our wind power, etc. And we're trying to understand and create the scientific knowledge that's needed to actually make the right decisions. Because one of the challenges with the biodiversity area is, I mean, there's so many feelings in this area as well. So we need the science, we need the data in order to make sure decisions are right. And we have, for example, just to quickly mention a couple examples. So, and I get quite excited with this. So in our R&D lab, we have established a large-scale fume where we're testing fish migration techniques. And I mean, it's 7 times 21 meters, where we're testing how eel and salmon are moving in certain conditions and how we can deploy technology to make sure that they can migrate safely past our hydropower dams. We are using face recognition, eDNA, to identify specific species for birds, for fish, etc., near our sites, and also how we can use techniques to make sure that when specific species are getting closer to our sites, that we can consider how to protect them at certain points in time. So super exciting activities we have ongoing, and technique will be a part of the solution.
Excellent. Thank you for all the inspirational stories. I'm hearing a few themes across the panelists before and just now, so maybe to add a few summary thoughts here. I hear this need for bold ambition. That is the first step. What is the society we want to create? What is the sustainable future we need? What's our role to deliver against that? Second, we need the data. We need to assess, we need to understand. We're now emerging common frameworks to really take the action that's going to matter. The action that we already know works, reducing use, restoration, circularity, working globally and locally, as well as innovation and R&D for the new technologies that we're going to need into the future. I do think this point around, linking these choices to financial data, to business opportunity, to business risks is increasingly really important to truly value nature and biodiversity in a way that businesses can make clear decisions around, the financing point that Virginia raised, the enabling environment, and of course, the regulatory frameworks and support, right, that enables companies to take action and penalizes those that do not, in my opinion, right? We have this huge opportunity to design and redesign how we work, how we operate intentionally, right, with nature in mind. Some of the examples you shared, Hella, I love, that kind of design thinking that you brought. So with that, again, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, panel, with your great examples, and thank you, Anastasia, for summing up as well. I would like to invite Maria, my colleague, executive director of the Finnish network, to give some of the perspectives of how you see this and how you're working with it from the Finnish network. So over to you, Maria.
Thank you. I was so inspired of this panel. I'm a fish biologist, so I will really need to speak with Vattenfall later. Hey, big thank for this event, and this has been so great. So very shortly, I would raise 2 very concrete examples from Finnish network. First is this, that we did this fall a impact study, how our business, we have 200 companies participating in Finland, how our business is impacting SDGs. And this is sort of a SDG selfie, for our network, and this is really a scientific study. This was not questionnaire. And because we are honest people, I can say this, that the result was that our companies, they produce a great deal of welfare and societal good, but in the expense of planet and nature. I have few copies there, and you can take them there. And secondly, we are now running for the first time in our local network the science-based targets for nature accelerator or program for our companies. 15 companies are now participating from different sectors, and they go through this SBT and target setting process, make materiality analysis, value chain analysis, measure, and etc. And when this program started, we asked them why you are participating, and I have now the findings which we got from, and these maybe summarize discussions this morning. First of all, these companies need to understand better as a whole the biodiversity, how their own business is impacting nature. So the biggest challenge is the big picture and the framework. They need to understand better how really what are the impacts, both direct and indirect impacts, and how to measure. We have heard this morning that you can really measure. They need systemic tools and goals to move forward, and especially they raised supply chains, which are very, very challenging when you are speaking about biodiversity. And many of these companies, they have done nature-related work for years, but it has been sort of under climate or under environment. It has been it's been a hidden issue, and now it really needs to lift up and make a strategic lift up for this work. And they welcome very much this science-based frame, as we heard already. And my last comment is that really the owners, they require investments in climate and nature. There comes questions from investors, as we have heard this morning, and great pressure from customers. And I know that all Nordics companies, they are really on top of this question now.
Thank you, Maria, for giving these very concrete Finnish perspectives on biodiversity. Just to summarize, because I think we all just want to speak to each other, and we maybe have some questions for someone, but what we really need to is to get started. It's very difficult to define what is biodiversity. It was mentioned, it's everything. It's the fungus, it's the frogs, it's new plants and insects, and it's everything. And how do you measure your impact as a business? So it's really important to engage with the finance sector. The Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure is a really good place to get started. They are working very closely together with the Science-Based Targets for Nature. So fantastic that you're using those frameworks. I think that's where we need to get started, and that's the question we need to ask all our sub-suppliers, because we need to start there. And we also need to get the governments to protect nature. 30 by 30 is pledged in Montreal, and we need that to regenerate. I also get very sad when we talk about this, and it affects us because it's so severe when you read the report. So we need to get started. And then it's also about what's material and how do you define materiality, and it's so hard. But in the EU, we have the taxonomy guiding the finance sector. We also have the new regulation. So we're getting the framework, and we need to get started, and we need to get the push for that. So collaboration is also key. So so start and measure, and I think the examples with technology is really also interesting to leapfrog some of the challenges to not only secure nature, but also how can we actively restore nature in areas, and how can we actually limit the risk that we cause as humans in business. So on that, I just invite you all to speak to each other, and thank you everyone. Thank you Swedish American Chamber for hosting us. Thank you Accenture for helping us with the study. Thank you so much Alexander and Pernille for arranging this fantastic event, and Maria, of course. So thank you, and let's start.